How to Walk into a Room by Emily P. Freeman is a contemplative and emotionally intelligent guide to navigating the quiet, often painful spaces of transition in our lives. Freeman, known for her gentle yet piercing writing style, presents a deeply human exploration of how we learn to let go of what no longer serves us, and how we gather courage to step into something new, even when it's undefined. The room is a powerful metaphor throughout the book, representing the places, roles, relationships, and identities we inhabit. The story begins with Freeman's personal reflections on times when she stayed too long in certain metaphorical rooms, places in life that had grown too small, too quiet, or too toxic. She describes how difficult it is to leave when you're unsure of what's next. Through her own narrative and the stories of others, she normalizes the feelings of fear, guilt, and confusion that come with change. Her tone is never prescriptive. Instead, she sits beside the reader like a friend who has walked this path, and knows the terrain well enough to say, "It's okay to leave." Freeman weaves her experiences as a writer, spiritual director, and everyday human being into rich narrative threads. She recalls the seasons when she tried to force herself to fit into roles that no longer aligned with who she was becoming. Her internal conflict plays out quietly but powerfully, showing that sometimes the loudest decisions are the ones we never voice out loud. It's in these inner thresholds that the real work of moving on happens. One of the book's central ideas is the spiritual and emotional cost of staying too long. Freeman suggests that our loyalty to a former version of ourselves, what she calls false obligation, can be a barrier to our growth. It's not always about leaving something bad, sometimes it's about honoring the quiet invitation to something better. She reminds the reader that moving on doesn't require a dramatic declaration. Often, it begins with noticing that we're shrinking in a space we once thrived. A recurring theme throughout the book is permission to not explain yourself, to not have it all figured out, and to walk away from something even if it still appears good on the outside. Freeman highlights how women especially can be conditioned to equate value with endurance, leading them to feel shame for walking away. Her storytelling here is especially compassionate, offering both personal vulnerability and a broader cultural commentary. As the chapters unfold, Freeman introduces what she calls the spiritual practice of exiting. She doesn't offer step-by-step formulas. Instead, she presents emotional and spiritual checkpoints, questions we can ask ourselves like, who am I becoming? What space do I need to grow into that? What am I afraid of leaving behind? Through reflection and storytelling, she builds a rhythm of self-awareness and emotional honesty. The beauty of her writing lies in how she avoids the trap of false urgency. Freeman emphasizes that clarity takes time. Sometimes we leave a room before we know which room we'll walk into next. She calls this the hallway, the in-between season that feels disorienting, lonely, and ambiguous. Rather than rush through it, she encourages readers to stay with the discomfort, to be present in the waiting, and to trust that the next room will eventually reveal itself. She also talks about the importance of witness. How having even one person acknowledge your departure can make all the difference. This idea is echoed in her recounting of moments when others offered her validation simply by naming what she already sensed to be true. In these stories, she explores the communal nature of courage, showing that sometimes strength comes not from within but from someone else saying, "Yes, it's time." Freeman draws from faith without being dogmatic. Spirituality is treated as a gentle undercurrent, not a prescription. Her God is quiet, patient, and loving, a presence that does not demand, but invites. For those moving on from spiritual spaces or re-evaluating their beliefs, her voice offers both softness and substance. In one particularly poignant story, she describes leaving a professional role that once defined her. There was no big conflict, no breakdown. Just a slow realization that her soul no longer thrived there. It's in this quiet unraveling that the book finds its emotional core. Walking out of that room felt like failure, she writes. But in time, she came to see it as sacred obedience to her becoming. The book also acknowledges the grief that comes with moving on. Freeman doesn't sugarcoat the sorrow. She invites the reader to mourn what's lost, even if it was chosen. This emotional honesty is what gives the book its integrity. It refuses the easy narrative of letting go and moving up, and instead tells the more complicated truth, that endings can hurt and still be holy. Throughout, Freeman returns to the idea that change is not a betrayal of who we were, but a continuation. Just as a room may have once been the right space, it can now be too small for the person you're becoming. This theme is especially powerful for those struggling with loyalty, guilt, or a fear of appearing ungrateful. Her message is, it's okay to change, and it's okay to outgrow what once fit perfectly. Her prose is lyrical, slow, and spacious, mirroring the emotional texture of the transitions she writes about. There's breathing room in the language itself, an intentional slowness that reflects the book's invitation to pause and notice what your soul is saying. Freeman uses metaphor in a way that is both grounding and expansive, creating a sense of gentle movement through emotional terrain. As the book nears its end, Freeman doesn't tie everything up neatly. She resists the impulse to close doors for the reader. Instead, she encourages us to become better at naming what season we're in. To notice when we're in a room that no longer fits. And to trust that walking into the unknown is not reckless, it's brave. What's on the other side may not be clear, but staying in a shrinking room is not the answer. In the final reflections, she speaks directly to the reader with a kind of quiet urgency, don't wait for permission to leave. If the room is no longer your room, you are allowed to walk out. You don't need to know what comes next. All you need is the courage to open the door. And as you do, trust that the next room, the one meant for who you're becoming, is already preparing a place for you.